There are multiple moderate right-wing channels here on YouTube that eventually push things too far. One channel that I am a fan of is called PragerU. Like my initial sentence, they have disappointed me with their big shift into the extreme. I really do not like their Eurosceptic views, economic policies, or desire to return to the 1950s. The one that seriously puts me off is their hate for renewable energy and denial of climate change. However disturbing their environmental policies are, that is only the second most face-palming thing in my opinion. The thing that sets me off the most is their support for the Iraq War and Bush administration. Let's see how they will defend it. In this video, a Fox News journalist will explain how the war in Iraq was not based on a lie. Let's check it out and see what's the reasoning behind this.
I took America to war in Iraq. It was all me. Okay, it was mostly me. I had some help from a clueless President George W. Bush and his neoconservative puppet master, Vice President Dick Cheney. Senior White House fanatics spoon-fed reporters like me cherry-picked intelligence about Iraq's alleged weapons of mass destruction so that America could invade Iraq and seize its oil. None of this is true.
Oh, this is gonna be good.
Yeah.
But many Americans continue to believe it. People died. It was a war. But President Bush didn't lie us into it. The false narrative that he did is itself a lie and deserves to be at last retired. There was no shortage of mistakes about Iraq, and some of the media's pre-war WMD stories were wrong, including some of mine. But so is the enduring, pernicious accusation that the Bush administration fabricated WMD intelligence to take the country to war. Before the 2003 invasion, President Bush and other senior officials cited the intelligence community's incorrect conclusions about Saddam's WMD capabilities and on occasion went beyond them. But relying on the mistakes of others, completely understandable mistakes given Saddam's horrendous record, and making errors of judgment are not the same as lying.
That's a mouthful of excuses. Saddam Hussein had tried to obtain weapons of mass destruction before, but had always failed. And this was without a war. Even if they had been totally cautious in characterizing the intel, the war would have still been a catastrophic mistake. There were numerous occasions when Bush and his advisors made statements that intelligence agencies knew to be false, both about WMDs and the link to 9/11. The term used for making statements that are known to be false is pretty much lying. I left a link to all these examples in the description below.
The members of the intelligence community with whom I dealt were overwhelmingly reliable, hardworking, and honest. But they were also human. And in the aftermath of 9/11, they were very wary of ever again underestimating a terrorist threat. There's an enduring myth that policymakers pressured intelligence analysts into altering their estimates to suit the Bush administration's push to war. Yet several thorough bipartisan inquiries found no evidence of such pressure. What they reveal instead is that bad intelligence led to bad policy decisions.
And basically, she tried to push the narrative again after examples are shown in the links I gave.
Based partly on the CIA's assurances of strong evidence for each claim, Mr. Powell was persuaded that the case against Saddam was, in his words, rock solid. Why wouldn't he? Over the previous 15 years, none of the congressional committees routinely briefed on Iraq's WMD assessments expressed concern about bias or error. The decision to go to war in Iraq received broad support in Congress from both Republicans and Democrats, and again, for good reason.
The Congress argument, how lovely, even though a large number of congressmen were against the Iraq War, and it stated that Congress themselves were lied to as well by the Bush administration.
Even if the intelligence community overestimated Saddam Hussein's WMD capability, it didn't create it out of thin air. Saddam had used chemical weapons on his own people, killing thousands. He had invaded his neighbors repeatedly. No, President Bush did not take America into a war because he was strong-armed by a neoconservative cabal. As President Bush himself famously asserted, he was the decider. And no, he didn't go to war for oil. If we wanted Saddam's oil, we could have bought it.
Look, Saddam Hussein was a murderous madman who killed lots of people and invaded other nations, but that does not give the US a pretext for invading Iraq. We could have bought it. Well, why spend money when you can get it for free?
President Bush's decision to go to war was based on the information that he and his team relied on. Information that was collected by the world's top agents and analyzed by the world's top analysts, including the intelligence agencies of France, Germany, and Russia, countries whose leaders did not support going to war. But they all agreed on one thing. Saddam had and was continuing to develop WMD.
Yes, and other nations chose to pursue diplomatic measures to first question Saddam on WMDs and then take action. One thing Mrs. Miller failed to state is that many of the sources on Iraq's weapons were unreliable, even on international standards. So why go with that information?
Our intelligence professionals and those of major European countries overestimated Saddam's capabilities. Mistakes like that filter through the system, from the White House to Congress to journalists to the public. And those mistakes impact policy. But here's the key thing to remember. They were mistakes, not lies.
Her entire argument on the decision to go to war so easily falls apart that I don't even need to repeat myself. There are so many factions about the Iraq war that show that it was a planned invasion. If Bush was so certain that Iraq had WMDs, why didn't he withdraw from Iraq after the initial invasion phase when they saw that none were there? Furthermore, if the Iraqi army truly had WMDs, why didn't they use them against the US troops during the war itself? These arguments basically end any debate about the Iraq war's validity. However, these conservatives' stance on it is, we didn't lie, we just made a mistake. They're not liars, they're just incompetent. Yeah, that's very reassuring. But it gets even better. These people wholeheartedly believe that the occupation phase of the war in Iraq had potential for victory, and any chance for it to end that way was ruined by the Obama administration. And who better present that case than another Fox News journalist?
The Iraq War was an absolute disaster.
Correct!
A historic mistake. That's probably what most Americans, not to mention most people around the world, would say. But is it true? President George W. Bush's decision to invade Iraq in 2003 is subject to fair debate. But it's important to recall that at the time, the war had overwhelming bipartisan support in the House and Senate.
They really like using this argument, but I won't repeat it again.
Dozens of allied countries joined the coalition. That support, however, quickly faded as casualties mounted and the war started to bog down.
Actually, the majority of countries didn't provide a lot of combat support. The main ones that did, other than the US, were the UK, Australian indirect fire support, and Polar Special Forces.
Criticism then turned to blame, when the weapons of mass destruction that were expected to be found were not. Nothing seemed to be going right. I know. I was there, serving as a lieutenant in the United States Army. As 2007 dawned, President Bush faced a near total collapse in both public and political support for the war.
Right, the result of a mistake in intelligence.
He had to make an impossibly difficult decision. Accept strategic defeat and leave Iraq in chaos, or send even more troops into battle. He chose the latter, a decision that came to be known as the surge. The Democrats predicted disaster. Senator Harry Reid, the majority leader at the time, said, "This war is lost, and the surge is not accomplishing anything." Senators Joe Biden, John Kerry, and Hillary Clinton agreed. They were all wrong. Led by General David Petraeus and supplemented by 30,000 additional troops, American forces and their Iraqi counterparts reversed the course of the war. It was one of the most stunning and successful turnabouts in modern military history. In 2008, I returned to the country to see for myself. I had seen the before. I could hardly believe the after. Attacks on U.S. forces were down 90%. American casualties were rare. Baghdad's most dangerous neighborhoods were secure. Al-Qaeda in Iraq was decimated. The oil was flowing again, Iraqis were rebuilding, and new elections were held.
Oh, no. Don't you dare state that the Iraq War was winnable. Especially not with the surge, because it did not accomplish the attributes you mentioned. Let's start from the beginning. No nuclear weapons were found by your own admission, nor was any link between Iraq and 9/11 found, which basically makes the whole entry into Iraq redundant. The new government in Iraq quickly descended into sectarian chaos as ethnic groups in the country turned on each other, which continued to return the country into a mess, which allowed the rise of many wonderful things. The Iraqi people didn't approve of the US presence because it just meant more war and the decimation of social services for the people, as well as more poverty, to the point where they would rather trust Islamic extremists more than the US-friendly government. Let's not forget that hundreds of thousands of them died. Eventually it became evident that the war was not about saving the country because private military contractors outnumbered US military troops. The war itself gave the reputation of the US as a bully instead of an ally, and the initial cost of the war, which was promised to be no more than $60 billion, jumped up to $200 billion. So you can quite easily say that this war was a bit of a disaster, considering that the country is still in chaos to this day.
This was the Iraq that President Barack Obama inherited when he took the oath of office on January 20th, 2009. Now, Iraq was certainly no Western-style democracy, but it was, as General Petraeus dubbed it, a functioning Irocracy. So much so that in a February 2009 speech to Marines at Camp Lejeune, President Obama said, "The relative peace and strong participation in January's provincial elections sent a powerful message to the world about how far Iraqis have come." Vice President Joe Biden was even more enthusiastic a year later when he said in February of 2010, "I am very optimistic about Iraq. I think it's going to be one of the greatest achievements of this administration." To put it mildly, it wasn't. So, what went wrong? It started when the Obama administration got into a dispute with the Iraqi government over something called a Status of Forces Agreement.
Which is something that Bush put into place so that US troops could withdraw from Iraq.
The Iraqis said they wanted to be able to prosecute American soldiers who broke Iraqi law. Appropriately, the Obama administration said no. We will prosecute our own lawbreakers. But instead of continuing to work towards an agreement, the president, against the advice of his own generals, ended negotiations. President Obama had said during his campaign that he would bring all the troops home. And the Status of Forces dispute gave him the perfect excuse to do just that. On December 18, 2011, the last U.S. soldiers crossed the border into Kuwait. The United States military was out of Iraq. The Iraq War was over for America, but it was about to begin again for Iraqis. Islamist terror, which U.S. soldiers had successfully crushed, returned with a new vengeance, most prominently in the form of ISIS. And the fragile peace between Sunnis and Shia fell apart. With America nowhere to be seen, Iraq's neighbor to the east and America's mortal enemy, Iran, filled the political vacuum, while ISIS brutally exploited the security vacuum. Initially dismissed by President Obama as the JV team, ISIS took control of a large part of the country. Its black flag soon flew over Mosul, Fallujah, Ramadi, and many other cities that American troops had secured at great cost. The war that George W. Bush had won, Barack Obama had lost.
This is the worst attempt at trying to lift the Iraq War. The only reason why Islamic terrorists came into power was because there was fertile ground in the region for that to happen. The country continued to be as corrupt as it was before, only a lot less emphasis was placed on killing enemies of the state, but fighting the remnants of Saddam's forces. With no unified order enforcer, there were people turning on each other every chance available. In that chaos, we saw the rise of Islamic terror groups, and they were able to spread because no one opposed them due to everyone fighting everybody. The war against the Islamic State would have happened anyway in the form of an asymmetrical war against US ground forces. The rise of Islamic terror groups was because of Bush, not because of Obama. Regardless of what kind of a president he may have been, at least Obama did what Bush failed. He withdrew from Iraq, where they should have never been in the first place. Take your bullshit and fuck off back to Fox News.